Hey, Mecca and Janelle, how's it going?
Good.
Hey,
Hey.
Kirah.
I'm so excited to have you guys here. Yeah, I was saying before, I've been like wanting to get you guys on the show for forever. And it was just like, I just knew I was like, you have to ask at the right time. And this is the perfect episode to have you guys on for episode 1 of the new season. So I'm
Yay.
so stoked. And yeah, I feel like I don't feel like I definitely haven't seen you guys. I saw you both at the very beginning of 2020. Janelle was my acupuncturist.
Yep.
And I was
Yay.
seeing you pretty much weekly for a while. So I saw you up until my health insurance ran out, basically, I think. Or no, I wasn't even using health insurance, but basically until I left New York. And then Mecca, I saw you like right at the end of that time too, right before the pandemic when we had our last astrologers dinner in New York in Chinatown.
Right. Yep.
And Colin was there,
Mm-hmm.
Alice Sparkly Cat, oh, Nadia Shaw. We had a
Right.
lot of people there. But yeah, it's nice to see your faces again.
It's
We're
good to
still
see you
here.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to see you.
So I want to, yeah, let's introduce you guys because this is your first time on the show. Janelle, do you want to start by just letting us know if you want to share your SMR? You can tell us, yeah, your practice.
I was just telling the ladies that I didn't know what SMR was, and I was just like, "What?"
Oh yeah, SMR. I should explain that more often. I just kind of like in my head, like everyone uses it now. So
Everyone knows what SMR is. So my sun, moon, and rising. I'm a Sag sun, a Pisces moon, and a Sag rising. I do a mix of traditional and modern astrology, I guess, and I kind of do a little bit of everything in a way. I'm always dabbling. I am a super Sag. I'm very mutable, so I'm always like, oh, what about this and what about that? And when I'm not doing that, I'm also doing acupuncture and clairvoyant work. So again, kind of all over diversifying and trying new things. So I try to do a little bit of everything. That's kind of my practice.
awesome. And you said you're trying to get into writing more. Do you mean like astro
Yeah,
writing or like
I'm not sure. Maybe, possibly. Yeah, I'm not sure if I want to go back to traditional horoscopes, but something to do with astrology, I think would be nice. Yeah.
gotcha. Yeah, I don't
Mhm.
blame you for not wanting to go to go back there.
It's a burner, so yeah.
It is. It
Mhm.
is. And I have to ask, I'm sure I know I've asked you this before, but I forget. Where's your Jupiter?
My Jupiter's in Aquarius, so I just
Okay.
finished up a Jupiter return. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So, I mean, you're so Jupiterian, so I had to ask. And Mecca, welcome. Do you want to share
Hi.
your SMR and a little about your practice?
Sure. So I am a Sagittarius sun, an Aquarius moon, excuse me, and a Leo rising. Sag sun, Aquarius moon, Leo rising. In terms of my practice, I dabble as well. I definitely it's funny because I started astrology with like evolutionary astrology and kind of branched out from there. A lot of what I practice is like relationship stuff. There's a little medical stuff in there. Mundane astrology sprinkled in, a lot of different things. Natal chart astrology, most definitely. But I think the thing that people kind of know me for the most is my horoscope writing. So I'm a published author. I have a nationally syndicated horoscope column. I also write for Bustle. So people, if they know me, they probably came across my articles or my horoscope somewhere along the line.
And I have to ask, where's your Mercury?
Capricorn.
That's what I
A
thought.
hard
Because
working Mercury.
yeah, I was like, I know my Mercury and Sag ass could never.
Trust me, I'm also Mercury and Saturn. Like I tried, and I have
Yeah.
Saturn to help, and we're like, it's not for us.
Not
Yeah.
no, but I mean, yeah, Mecca, you were like, if not the first, one of the first Black astrologers I had ever come across. And it was very like affirming, I think, yeah, you and Sam were definitely the first two. And excuse me. you were the first Black woman astrologer, published author, right?
Not the
In the
first one,
past, in the
but
past like couple decades.
yeah, in the past couple of decades, I've been the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. And you also connected me to my first writing gig, my first horoscope writing gig. So you're a huge major influence on me and my whole career and trajectory.
Aw.
So it's so awesome to have you here.
Oh, it's awesome to be here. I feel like we come full circle.
Yeah, exactly. And then you two have a show together as well, Stars on Fire. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it started out I want to say back in 2015, I think it was, or 2014, somewhere in there. It came out of an idea of going to see a Marvel movie.
I'm seeing Spider-Man right after this. I don't think that's Marvel, but I don't know.
It is Marvel.
Okay. No, Spider-Man is Marvel, but I know that there's like a discrepancy with like the studios. Because it's Sony versus somebody else, whatever. But so we wanted to go see an Avengers movie, and we were like talking about the astrology in it, especially in terms of the characters. So we were talking about Tony Stark versus Bruce Banner, and talking about like how they showed the different sides of Mars, the Scorpio side and the Aries side. And that just spiraled into like, why don't we start a podcast?
Yeah. And it's such a great podcast. It's so, I don't know. I feel like it's very similar type of vibe to this show, where it's like, you just like are listening to people talking about astrology in a way that's like really digestible, really relatable. But specifically, you guys do a lot of mundane astrology. You guys talk a lot about just like what's going on in the sky. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, I do want to like kind of talk about how you guys know each other. How did you guys meet?
I still can't remember the exact day that we met. It's kind of a mystery. I think we met trying to do a work event together that was eventually canceled, and then we just decided to hang out.
Yeah, I think that's how that happened.
Yeah,
but even that is kind of fuzzy, because I feel like we had already
known each other,
kind of in the same, and like in the same circle because of Sam.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sam
Reynolds is who we're talking about.
Yeah,
friend
Sam
of
Reynolds.
the pod.
But eventually, like, we somehow got called at the same time to do like an astrology related gig, but that didn't pan out, but a friendship did.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
After the thing got canceled, because we actually showed up and like, oh, we're not doing it. We're like, okay. So we kind of like walked away, and we went to get some food, and we ended up pulling out our charts, I think, and we ended up looking like we should work together.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know on what yet, but there's a lot of stuff in our charts that just made us feel like we were supposed to collaborate. And in a couple of months, or I don't think it was that long after that we did. We started to do the podcast maybe a couple months to a year later, less than that, I think.
Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah. And I guess I met you guys through I don't remember how I met you, Janelle.
I don't remember either. Did we meet because of acupuncture?
No, or maybe it was just on Twitter first. And then I think I found out you were an acupuncturist through Twitter.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's probably how it happened. And yeah, same Mecca. I don't remember how we first started talking. I mean, I'm assuming it was Twitter, but also I feel like we talked. I feel like we did. Were you at that event that Colin and I, were you speaking at that too? Or is that something else?
Maybe.
It was like, oh no, you were there. You were there in the audience. Cause I remember being like, oh my God, Mecca's here. Oh. And like, so like nervous. But it was like New York City astrology meetup. And
yes. I remember that. Yeah.
So we had maybe we met in person for the first time then. I don't know, but it's been a few years. It's all fuzzy. But regardless.
But we're glad to be here.
Yeah. Yes. I'm glad all the connections were made.
It's funny, we're always juggling all these dates and times. We're like, when did we meet?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
Exactly. but yeah, so to get a little bit back to mundane, if no one knows what that term means, mundane astrology is essentially the astrology of the world events, I guess, is like the most basic way of putting it. And that can encompass anything from, politics to extreme weather events to, would you feel like economy kind of falls into that too?
Mm-hmm.
Like just the astrology of things that are not personal. It's a little bit, it's more, I'm like using my hands, like it's more top level, you could say, or removed in that way and less in the weeds. I would say it's like very like Saturnian astrology. How would you guys kind of describe mundane? If differently, or if you want to add anything to that.
It's the astrology of the world, essentially, like all the things that fall out of our personal, experience of astrology, I think kind of falls into mundane, because it's outside the human body, essentially, right? So it's not about us for once, but it's about everything else that exists in our world. And that does include like the weather and, money and all the other, animals and entities, whatever that would be part of our living world experience would fall under mundane, I think.
I guess like entertainment. Yeah. I was gonna say it's kind of like our collective experience too. And then you can kind of even zoom in on like specific countries and specific regions, even states, cities, and look at the astrology of those spaces and those places. And that also falls under mundane. And again, like weather also falls under mundane. It's these, these events that affects many people or groups of people, you could say. So I'm curious, like, not every astrologer does mundane, like I feel like I pay attention to stuff just because most astrologers do, but I try not to like, I think I got to a point where I realized like, oh no, like you need to do this specifically. Like you can't just like, like make predictions. Like you can totally just make predictions based off of, the astrology that but like, it's very different from natal astrology. And the way that you apply, astrology to worldly events as opposed to a person, it's different. And, doing predictions mundanely versus natally is very different too. So I'm curious, like what got you into mundane astrology, and was there like a specific event that really like catalyzed it for you, or just a moment in time maybe? Janelle, do you want to start?
I can't pinpoint it down to a specific event, but I do know that for me, I've always enjoyed history. So I think my love of history led me to mundane astrology, because what I ended up doing randomly was I would live tweet historical documentaries, for example. Like I remember I did one for like the Romanov dynasty falling, and I would just pull up charts, because of course history documentaries are always giving you dates and rough times. Like great, I can just start looking at these things. And so I would look at these charts and see all of these configurations, just be like, oh shit, well clearly no one had an astrologer, because these things are very obvious that these weren't great charts for whatever reason. And I did the same thing, I think, with like the French Revolution. So again, I think because they have so much dates and times available, it's really good practice just to see what's happening in the heavens at the time of these major historical events, right? So, that's just one way for me that I started to really catch on to those kind of patterns. And I think it kind of went from there. That's what I would say. But I think it helps to have a love of history when you're doing mundane astrology.
Did you say you have a Saturn Mercury conjunction?
Yes.
Yeah. I was like, that's exactly what that sounds like. Love of history. No, I mean, if you don't already follow Janelle on Twitter, like I'm not on Twitter much anymore, but like your threads, like when you just like live tweet things, it's the best. It's the best. And you always have such thorough, especially when you're adding astrology to it, like it gets so thorough and you have like this, like, you're just so good at it.
Thank you. I love doing it because it's very much on the fly for me. Like I'm just pulling it up and just, it's evident. So I think for astrologers who do like, if you do want to practice, I would say start there, right? Because this is stuff that's already happened in the past. So you have all this documentation, you have all the evidence. Now you just need to look at the charts and see how they match up and see what those patterns are.
Definitely. How about you, Mecca?
I think I got into mundane astrology. Well, I mean, I'm a Sag, so politics and global events is something that I've always been interested in ever since I was a kid. Like, you know, growing up the way that I did with a Sag and an Aquarius parent, you know, we had to learn about those things. And so when I became an astrologer, or when I started studying astrology, I think I got into mundane by way of electional astrology. Because once I learned that pretty much like everything had a birthday, I would find myself like looking up dates and looking up times when, like, you know, movies were released, or, you know, shows or things like that, or, you know, just thinking about like, you know, when someone decided to launch something and then how that might have went. Like, for example, I think I started looking a lot at like Mercury retrograde and like the tech companies and seeing like what they would do or what would happen, like, you know, with Apple or Microsoft or Samsung or whatever, and how like every Mercury retrograde there will always be some sort of like thing that they were up to. And I think over time they've also learned how to use the retrogrades, because I noticed that a lot of times when they're doing their updates and like improvements and like, you know, fixing bugs and things like that. But before that, years ago, they always used to be like, oh, we're recalling, you know, this phone, or, you know, this is not working, we had to recall this, you know, because I think eventually somewhere along the line somebody got hip to astrology and was like, oh, maybe we should be using this.
That is such a interesting observation, because I would never have known that, like noticed that. But
yeah,
wow.
Because for a time they used to launch all the time, like new phones on a retrograde, and we'd all be like, why did you do that? And then have to watch them walk it back.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you remember when healthcare.com, like when Obama's healthcare website launched, it was like the day of a retrograde and it like crashed?
Yes, I remember that.
Presidents need an astrologer. Nixon was onto something.
Well, we can also talk about the amount of times we've had Mercury retrograde during an election, right? And how we've had a lot of difficulties with that. So the last election, and I think the previous two as well, I think almost there's been a couple election like major like presidential election cycles that have had retrogrades and have been kind of clouded by, are these results real? Are they accurate? For better or for worse?
That's right. We had that for the 2000 election. And again, for 2020, I forgot. I talked about that in an article.
And how long we had to wait for results, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I remember on the election day in 2020, I was just like, I'm not going to even read any of the, like, I'm not going to keep up with anything, because I know that we're not going to know the full results for a couple of days, because Mercury is stationing and like Mars was stationing. And there was just so much that I was trying to tell people, like, it's fine. It's fine. I was like hinging on Kamala's, like, she was entering this peak period, all that stuff. So I was like, it's going to be fine. Just wait till the station. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's, pardon me, it's so like mundane astrology is one of those things where, like, again, it's so easy to kind of dabble in it because we're paying attention to what the planets are doing otherwise. But once you really start to like get Saturnian about it, get mercurial about it, and like really get into the weeds of the facts and the dates and all of that, like you can, the patterning that you can, you know, start to notice kind of becomes mind-blowing, which reminds me of like Cosmos and Psyche. Have you guys read Cosmos and Psyche? Rich, yeah. I definitely haven't done cover to cover.
Some of it.
But I mean, still, like, that's such an amazing text when it comes to, like, you know, tracking these transits on a long-term you know, not that he was tracking them long term, but he was going back, you know, to see in the history, like how these cycles, the patterns repeat themselves. So yeah, it's a really interesting, and it's the oldest tradition of astrology. It's the oldest branch of astrology. Astrology started politically, you know, back then it was just kings who had astrologers. And it was about when to wage war and like when there's going to be a famine, you know, like things like that.
Oh my gosh. They're like, we don't care about you peasants. Who cares about what's happening in your personal life? Who has time for that?
Yeah. I mean, it took a long time for astrology to become as accessible as it is now. But yeah, I mean, okay. So I kind of want to talk a little bit more about the difference between mundane and natal. Because yeah, I mean, how we view transits on a mundane level versus natally. Do either of you have anything to say about that? Like the difference between the two, or how you approach it?
Yeah, I think for me, maybe Janelle might also be able to speak to this, but I think for me, like being an astrologer that reads natal charts as well as mundane, I tend to find that there's a lot of sometimes like clarification or even sometimes damage control that I have to do with people who perhaps are following, you know, the more mundane stuff and then looking at their charts and being really like freaked out or upset about like, you know, what does this mean? This is going to happen to me. And me having to kind of be like, just because this transit is doing this, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to show up, you know, in your life this way. It could show up this way. But then also at the same time, clarifying that like, it's still a collective experience. So on some level, we are experiencing, you know, certain transits or these things together, but how you individually experience it might be very different from how you might read about it or someone else might experience it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of like, you know, the pandemic, you know, for a lot of people, it was, or it is, because it's still ongoing, but it is what I mean, more speaking to the beginning when it started, like 2020 specifically, really like for a lot of people it was life-changing in so many ways, right? So we can say the astrology of 2020 was that way. For some people got extremely fucking rich off of this, right? Like for some people, this was like incredible, and changed their lives in so many ways. For other people, they lost their lives. They lost loved ones and they lost their jobs. And, you know, that's like a mundane, you know, transit. You could say the Saturn Pluto conjunction that manifested very differently for different people. Like it was on Bezos's son and look how much richer he got,
right?
You know?
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good point, that like the way that the transits, we're going to experience them collectively, like the astrology of 2020, right? We all experience that, but how it's going to manifest and where it's hitting you in your chart is going to be so specific to you, in your experience. Yeah. How about you, Janelle? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, the mundane, like the world that we live in, it's like an umbrella, right? Like how it impacts you on a personal level is going to be, like you said, very specific. So there's some people, for example, that conjunction in 2020 astrology was great for their chart. Maybe great things happened to them, you know, the same thing for now and vice versa. So it's not a judgment thing. And I think that's something that we also have to kind of reiterate a lot with astrology. Like it's not about judgment. The heavens aren't cursing you. Like no one's out to get you. Like it's not, you know, you did nothing wrong being born a Scorpio or a Gemini, whatever the newest sign is that everyone hates. It's not about that, you know, like I think it's important for people to remember that everything is a cycle, right? There are ups and there are downs. And I think we have to reiterate that to people because I think our Western way of civilization makes us feel like it's constantly upward trajectory and it's always going forward and it's always towards the top and it's never ending. That's just not how our universe works. Nothing in our known world or universe works like that. Everything goes in a circle, up and down and up and down. So I think once you take out the judgment around why things aren't going well for you right now, just say, well, maybe this is part of my down cycle. Maybe it's my turn on the bottom of the wheel and eventually I'll come back up. And I think that shifts things. But you know, I think linear time and thinking has really done a number on us, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that a lot of the time that I've been spending in session with clients over the past 2 years has been getting people to wrap their mind around that fact of like, the chart is a map. It's showing you ways that you can navigate to reach certain goals or destinations. Sometimes in reaching a place, or sometimes a path that you have to take is maybe a path where you have to be still, and wait until, the timing or the next opportunity comes up. So yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard though. As astrology, we were talking to Kirah before, like, we just went through some pretty challenging periods in our charts, and it was hard. I was calling Mecca all the time, like, girl, how long? And this is horrible, and I don't want to do this, and this sucks, and why? And so don't think that because we understand this information that it's any easier to go through. We're not more enlightened because in fact, it's worse sometimes because you know better, and you're just like, and I'm still whining. I know what this is. I understand it, but I hate it. So, and I would think that's the same thing with world astrology. Like sometimes we have these really peaceful periods, and then we have really turbulent times, and it sucks. It is what it is, and that's okay.
Yeah. And this is a particularly turbulent one for sure. So yeah, I mean, that's such a good point too. It's like personally and interpersonally and collectively, we're all going to be going through various different levels of peaks and valleys and different turns on the wheel or in the spiral. But that's the cool thing about astrology, even though, it can suck sometimes knowing better. But also it can be so helpful to just know that there's an endpoint, or at least a transition point a lot of the times, and to be able to like have that big picture perspective can be honestly life-saving in a lot of ways. So thank you, astrology, for that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that when I was going through a major Pluto transit. Like, because I had astrology at that point, even in college, there was an end date. And so even though it was a far off end date to me at that point in time, I knew there was an end date. Versus if I hadn't known, I would have thought that was going to be my entire life, maybe. And that would have impacted me in a lot of ways. So
yeah.
I think about that. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that I had a couple of examples of that recently where I had some clients going through Pluto transit as well, and Neptune, which, is a planet that tends to sneak up on you because it makes things so hazy and weird.
Yeah, it's like, how did it get so foggy all of a sudden?
Just like, where am I going? Who am I? What is this place? What is reality? Yeah, that's Neptune.
Yeah. And being able to tell someone like, no, it's not you. You're not imagining things. It's happening, and also there's a time limit on it. I think, definitely helps.
For sure. So with all that being said, I think we should talk about the astrology of 2022. And the major transits, because I don't know, top level, like overall, how are you guys feeling about this year, especially in comparison to the past 2 years?
It stinks. No.
I mean, could it be better? Sure. Like,
sure. I want to go back to 2019 too, but
it has its highs and its lows. I mean, like we were just talking about, everything has its highs and its lows, right? I think the other thing we haven't touched upon though is human, free will.
Right.
So these cycles are happening regardless of what we do down here. Like, they're going to happen no matter what. It really is about the human reaction and response that usually is what we're like, I don't know. Like, are there trustworthy humans in charge? I don't know. Like, maybe things, really depends on what people decide to do. So I would say with astrology, kind of approach it from a neutral standpoint, but also highlight where things could definitely go left or right. And the hopes for what people will respond to and how they'll respond to it. So I think it's always important to show, the good and the bad. Yeah. There's no there's no sprinkles on top, and there's no poop, but there's something. We'll just have to wait and see. Yeah.
I hear that. How about you, Mecca?
Well, I think probably in the same boat with Janelle. I mean, I think that after after having the South Node whip my ass over the past year and a half, I think that well, you know, I'm a Mercury in Capricorn. I have a really strong Saturn in my chart. So like I don't know if I've ever been super optimistic person, but but I will say that I hope, my hope for the year, especially when we talk about the Jupiter transit, because you know Jupiter is at home in Pisces now. We have that big Jupiter Neptune conjunction coming up, you know, over the spring. I hope that it will give people some hope that they've been missing as of late. You know, we started out this sort of cycle with all of that, those Capricorn planets, you know, heavy Saturn, heavy Pluto, Jupiter back was in Capricorn. Then from there, we went to, you know, Jupiter and Saturn and Aquarius. So there's been a lot of Saturnian stuff going on. My hope is that Jupiter being in Pisces will help to balance some of that out. But at the same time, I'm also wary of the fact that this Jupiter in Pisces transit could also just inflate a lot of the illusion and escapism and misinformation and also zealotry, you know, like religious zealotry that we've been seeing that's been fueling a lot of like the discord going on. For example, here in the United States, you know, the evangelical church has got people in a chokehold, unfortunately. And I'm
never
just
ending,
like, you know,
it feels.
right. And sometimes, you know, me and Janelle talk about this on our show, you know, all the time, that sometimes when planets are in their home sign is when they are the strongest in terms of doing the most fuck shit. You know?
The biggest dicks.
So
nobody.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like, who gonna check me, boo? So
exactly. Especially when Saturn and Jupiter can't see each other. Yeah.
And I've definitely noticed since Jupiter's moved off into Pisces, like Saturn feels more Saturn, right? For me, it's happening in my third house, right? So I'm like, ooh, I'm not as talkative as I was before. And I don't want to, I'm editing more. I don't want to talk as more. Like, you know, I'm definitely feeling Saturn without Jupiter there to buffer and kind of mitigate some of his harshness. So that's definitely something that I'm trying to keep cognizant of, because he is going to be there for a little bit longer. I think till March of next year, I think it is.
Saturn,
right?
yeah.
So we still have some more time, but he is kind of super powered, you know. And you know, I like Jupiter in Pisces so far, but it can feel a little bit kind of lost at sea sometimes. You're kind of distracted. You're just like, oh well, what a pretty butterfly. Oh yeah, that about that thing that I totally forgot to do. Damn it. Like, let me go back and retrace. You know, it's kind of that kind of float off and come back feeling, which can feel a little bit difficult when you have all this crisis oriented stuff on your plate.
Yeah. So we've been sort of talking about the Jupiter and Pisces transit, which started December 29th, and it's going to be in Pisces until May 10th. It'll come back at the end of the year. October 27th through December 20th. So we get a little extra, like, I think it's like 7-8 weeks or something that we get at the end of the year. But I mean, as a Pisces rising, I will just say, I feel like it's not fair that Jupiter moves through so fast. We got like a whole year of Jupiter in Capricorn in fall 2020, but no, it just has to zoom through Pisces. But I will say, I kind of had this thought recently, like, yeah, that's because Pisces risings are like we're way too powerful to have Jupiter in our first house for too long. Because that's the thing. I think it's a good point that you just raised about Jupiter and Pisces, like, and just like a planet in its own sign. I feel like this can be a really nourishing transit for a lot of people who like need that hope. I definitely needed that hope that Jupiter is providing me. And just the faith that Jupiter and Pisces can provide. While at the same time, for some people, it's going to be extremely overwhelming. You know, for some people, it's going to be like, like they're busting wide open in terms of their sensitivity, right? Their vulnerability. For some people, it might be really hard in terms of their substance use, with Jupiter and Pisces. I mean, you can drink, you can consume some substances that, can kind of take you out of this world. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But for some people who have more trouble, balancing that and not going overboard with that, like this can be a really difficult transit for them to maintain sobriety or to stay in a place where they're not, overindulging. Cause one of our guests, Ari Felix, described Jupiter and Pisces as like the overflow, which can be so necessary for so many areas. Like we need some overflow in some places, but for others, not so much.
Yeah, I agree. I think that definitely is something, Janelle and I were also talking about, that one of the concerns that we do have around the Jupiter Neptune conjunction is a rise in like overdoses, drug overdoses, substance abuse. And I never forget, I had sat in on a medical astrology class once with Judith Hill, and who, I think she might be a Sag too.
I think she's a Pisces. She's
a Pisces. Okay, Jupiterian still.
Or at least, I think she's a Pisces, but it might be another Pisces placement. But yeah,
gotcha.
She's Jupiterian for sure.
But I'm such a, we're both fans of her work, but I remember her saying that Neptune can be anxiety, in not just, like the escapism, but also people wanting to escape like that feeling of like uncertainty, or just that feeling of being constantly adrift, as Janelle was talking about, and kind of using those things as a way to cope. So, we're definitely concerned about that. I think the other thing too, when I think about the Saturn and Uranus square that's still going, I think on the one hand, Saturn and Uranus kind of battling together has definitely, to some degree, like helped us with kind of recognizing like, wow, there's a lot of stuff that needs to change. And here's the way that we need to change it. Like one thing that I feel encouraged about is like, a lot of people are starting to form labor unions, for example. And you have a lot of people who are pushing back and being like, I don't want to work myself into the dirt for nothing anymore, which has been nice to see. And there's I remember I was talking to a client recently who did a lot of work back in the 90s, back when Saturn was in Aquarius the last time, and we were talking about how that was a time when there was a lot of push, in terms of like the like queer rights and representation, and the battle against like the HIV epidemic and things like that. And so here we are, fast forward, and now we're battling with COVID, on top of other health related issues, and still kind of pushing for housing rights, for example, is another thing that's been coming up. But at the same time, I feel like the Saturn Uranus square has also brought out a lot of anarchists too, right? Where you have like people who are willing to blow up the Capitol, or go and try to like blow up synagogues, and like I feel like that's also a side effect of this transit as well that I'm also concerned about. So I feel like with astrology, it has a lot to do with how we use it. It's the gift and the curse, I think, sometimes. And I think the free will piece is so important, because it's kind of like, well, how do we want to use it? But I also do have a lot of concerns around certain things like that, and just in terms of like, well, people like to stick with what they know, and sometimes what they know isn't always the best thing.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that comes up with Jupiter Neptune is class struggle. So we're already seeing a lot of that. We're just like, like, why is there such a economic disparity, not only in this country but around the world, and what that means, especially with all the different climate change and people thinking about what the future is going to look like. You know, will we be able to afford to be on this planet? You know, like that's a big question for a lot of people. And I'm sure it's a question that has been, you know, answered or asked many times over the centuries. Like, this is not the first time that this has happened. There have been, you know, class struggles and coups and all sorts of crazy shit throughout history. So this is not the first time, but in a way it feels to me, as someone, you know, growing up in the 20th and 21st centuries, just like, there almost feels like there's this idea that we're better than what we used to be. And that we're different now. Like, all that crazy stuff happened before, you know, wow. Now I'm just like, and I wonder if that really, you know, got us caught up here.
I like vehemently believe like that. I just hate that so much. I hate when people say like, oh, we just have to wait for the old people to die off, because I'm like history says otherwise.
Right.
You're like,
things keep being bad and people keep dying. Like, it's not yeah.
But that really comes back down to our choices, right? So really identifying like, what did they do to get them those results, and what do we have to do to get the results that we want, you know? And that's why that history stuff is so powerful. But it also comes back around to like, who gets to write history, right? So all these things are coming up, like, so we have to hope the history that we're actually reading and you know, researching is accurate. Sometimes too. So that can be something, especially with Jupiter Neptune, right? It's like, did that happen? How do you know? Like, you know, because Neptune's in there. You have to be really discerning about those things. So I'm excited for that, but I'm also excited for some of the humanitarian things that might come out of Jupiter Neptune, right? Where people might find their heart and compassion and be like, no, we can do something really amazing here and give people hope through the arts and music and theater, and, you know, tell us a new story. Because I always think about storytelling when it comes to Jupiter, right? I've been around the world. I've traveled all over. I've spoken to all these people. I've been with kings and paupers, and here's what I've learned, right? You can do this instead. And we can do big things and expand and do and reach the heavens, or we can crash down to hell. You know, it's your choice.
I mean, speaking about a lot of these things, like, yeah, I think so much of it does have to do with this Jupiter and Pisces. I haven't really thought of it in the sense of like, you know, the wealth disparity, especially. But something I have been thinking about in regards to that, which is sort of a first when you think about it, is the United States Pluto return. And this is something that, you know, when we talk about mundane transits, like scaring our clients and into thinking like something bad's going to happen to them. This is one of them that I've gotten, of the, you know, people just being kind of nervous about it. And I mean, don't blame me. I don't blame anyone for being nervous about it. Especially because there's so much, you know, there's so much online about it as well. But yeah, I would love to talk to you two about it and how you're sort of, thinking about it, because I'm sure it's on a lot of people's minds. Well, this comes out February 7th. The US Pluto return is February 22nd, 2020. So like 2 weeks away basically from this coming out. And I'm sure it's in a lot of people's minds. So if anyone doesn't know, what we're referring to is the fact that at the founding of the United States, and by that I mean the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Pluto is at 27 degrees of Capricorn, and it's finally returning to that degree for the first time on February 22nd, 2020. And that's a big deal for a lot of reasons. It's not the only time it's going to hit that degree, because Pluto does move back and forth kind of, right? Does it come back to 27? I'm sure it does.
I think so. Yeah. Cause
usually
it'll retrograde
Okay. Yeah. Cause it does hit 0 Aquarius next year. But it does come back into late Capricorn.
Yeah.
So yeah, who wants to start with the Pluto return?
You go, Mecca.
I know Janelle's like, no.
Well, I'll preface it by saying that I haven't had the opportunity, and maybe this is me like not wanting to also to look at the exact chart of the Pluto return, to see like what's going on. But just in terms of like the fact that if you know, if 2020 is any indication of what this Pluto return means, and also the fact that Venus, right? So Venus has been in Capricorn since what, I think around Thanksgiving of
Something
last
like
year,
that. Yeah.
around that time. I forget the exact date, but and we have Venus in Capricorn until March.
Oh,
Venus,
it was, sorry, I just remember because it was at like 11 degrees on my birthday. So it must have been like earlier in November.
right, yeah. So early November. Venus has been crossing all of that sky that Saturn crossed back when it was in Capricorn, Jupiter crossed, right? All Pluto, like, so Venus, and then we started 2022 out with the Venus retrograde, and Venus has been dancing around with Pluto pretty much since the year began. And that was when, you know, the Omicron variant was out of control. There was, you know, the hospitals were filling back up again, and there was just a lot of, we're not prepared. You know, like a lot of what I felt what's going on was like, we've done this, but we're still doing the same dumb shit. That's how it really came off to me, at the expense of people over profit. Like, it was very much like, oh, we don't care. We're still going to keep going in the same direction because we don't want to lose money. But then it's like, but you're still losing money anyway because everybody's fucking sick.
Yeah.
So for me, when I think about this Pluto return, my hope is that it doesn't become, you know, and Janelle, I'm laughing because Janelle knows that I'm a big fan of like dystopian fiction. She hates it. She hates it. She's like,
Janelle's too Jupiterian for that.
Right.
Like,
she's too Jupiterian.
So am I.
But my, you know, I'm very Saturnian. My moon is in Aquarius. Like, it's very, very Saturnian energy for me. So I like it. But my hope is that it doesn't become, you know, some sort of dystopian. I mean, we're already kind of in it anyway, you know, since we've been in it for a while. But my hope is that it doesn't get worse, because the thing is that Pluto is a planet that does not abide by what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I feel like Pluto doesn't abide by like avoidance, you know.
Denial. Doesn't abide by denial.
Thank you.
Does not.
That's the right. Doesn't abide by denial. And the thing is that like, if you deny, eventually that shit will come back to bite you, you know.
That is a word.
I was just thinking about it. I was just like, ugh, because I think this Venus transit with Pluto is really supposed to help us get clarity about what our values are, right? Like, what do you value about your structures in your society, the things that make it run, or, you know, the very Capricornian like fixtures, the foundation. What do you value, right?
Infrastructure,
right? Even the arts, right? We've lost a lot of artists. We've lost a lot of peacekeepers, and, you know, we lost Desmond Tutu. Who else? We lost
a lot of our elders.
A lot of our elders, Betty White, Bell Hooks. Like, there's a lot of elders who have this position of being Venus for us, which is, you know, important, because we need to know how to be kind and loving, and, you know, nourish things back into life. And with Venus going into the underworld to meet up with Pluto, it really is kind of like, well, if you value it, you will protect and cherish it. You won't allow Venus to be kidnapped into the underworld to be, you know, abused, essentially. So, you know, I think that was kind of the story, but if we don't value it, we're going to lose more.
Yeah.
Like we said, Pluto does not do well with denial. And I say that from my personal Pluto experience when he went over my sun and ascendant years ago. Like, when I tried to deny, he's like, no. Like, if you deny, I'm going to shake you. I'm going to do whatever. And I fear with the Pluto return in the country, it's probably going to look like that. It's going to be a lot of shaking and confronting, and, you know, it's going to be a little bit painful, because right now we're even going through denial. No, we didn't do slavery. How we can't teach little white kids about the shit that we did to amass all this wealth and power? No, like, denial. And so,
and not to mention the Pluto return is in the US Sibley chart second house of money, and resources, right? Especially opposing the entire Cancer stellium in the 8th house. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Mecca.
No, I was just gonna add in that I just think that ultimately what I feel, and I think Janelle echoes this, is that if it can if this can if this if the powers that be, the government in this country continues to deny the fact that people are more important or less important than profit, then we're going to see the fallout of that. And I don't think that the economy is, it almost makes me think about like that line from the Color Purple is like, until you do right by me, no good is going to come to you. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And by that, when you say that, like, until you do right by me, it makes me think, until you do right by, the native indigenous people of this country, until you do right by the descendants of the people who built this fucking country, until you do right by the people who are still, starving on the streets, until you do right by the people who, risk their lives for this country and other fucking countries fighting your wars. Like, yeah, nothing good's gonna come.
Nothing good's gonna come. Yeah, that's basically it. And that's going to be very confronting because, this nation has, especially since 9/11, which we were looking at briefly before we got on call, I think me and Mecca, but a lot of propaganda about us being number one and we're the best and no one can, like that's deep. I don't know where, even as when I was a teen, I was like, that's not true. Like
that's like Cancer stellium, like the nationalism.
It's like, that's not true. Like, that's literally not true, but it is a belief. And if you have that kind of belief, it's going to be hard to face reality when it comes crashing down. Like, how can the greatest country in the world have 800,000 deaths and counting from a virus that I'm not saying it's the easiest virus to battle, obviously not to diminish all the hard work that's gone on into it and defeating it or, handling it, but it's a lack of leadership. Yeah. It's a lack of community. It's a lack of regard for yourself and others that this is how it's going here. And you can't deny it because the numbers speak for themselves. Yeah. This is not a winning country right now. That's okay because we're going through some shit, right?
Yeah. Pluto return shit.
Pluto return shit, amongst other things.
Yeah. I mean, about the hope that this doesn't become a dystopian future. I do also believe that we're already in it. Like this is the dystopia. And I also, it makes me think about Saturn and Aquarius, like kind of governing or is responsible for this Pluto thing happening. And not to say like Saturn will be in Pisces next year during the subsequent returns when Pluto comes back. But I don't know. There's something slightly hopeful in me about that. Not to say that Saturn's like, Saturn's not a benefic or anything, but the fact that it's Saturn in its preferred domicile, in the air domicile, and in the domicile that has to do with the populace, the public, and structuring society in a way that is hopefully more inclusive. Not to say that that's, all Aquarius, because it's not necessarily the case, but I think what is true is that Saturn wants structure and Saturn wants order. And, in Aquarius, it wants that through the populace, it wants social structure and social order. So I don't know which way, that'll swing, but to me, it's like, I'd rather Saturn and Aquarius governing. Oh no. Sorry. I just got a pop up on my screen. It said I was signed out of my Zoom account. That was weird. Okay. So I think one of my assistants is doing something with it. But anyway, what was I even saying? Oh yeah, Saturn. I'd rather Saturn in Aquarius than ruling this than like a Saturn in Aries personally, or like, even a Saturn in Sag even. So, I mean, maybe Saturn in Sag would be a little bit more benefic, but but yeah, I don't know. There's something about the fact that Saturn is, I don't know. Now it's making me think we're having a Saturn trine too, because the US has Saturn in Libra natally, right? So I don't know whether to look at that as like a positive or potential, negative, but
right.
Something to think about.
Yeah, I think it could go both ways, right? Because sometimes Aquarius energy can be very cold. and cold to the point where there is no heart, there is no emotion, there is no thought to, like, you know, how this makes someone feel. However, I do think that one of the things that Saturn and Aquarius is doing, and this, you know, Janelle has spoke a lot about this, is like how important community is right now. And if we are going to make it through this challenging period, we can't afford to coast or put our feet up and think like, oh, you know, they'll pick it up or someone else will do it. It's like it's all very much an all hands on deck situation that we're all in. And that really is the only way I think that we're going to be able to get out of things. And so, you know, everybody kind of doing their part, you know, the lawyers, the doctors, the therapists, the astrologers, the, you know, the essential workers, like everybody, you know, right now, I think in many ways, it has to, like, that's the reality, right? So Saturn's reality, like the reality of the situation is that we all need to work together to do this. And I think that the thing about Saturn, which I appreciate, and I always try to get my clients to appreciate Saturn too, is that Saturn will make you do it again and again and again until you get the shit right.
Yeah.
So there's no escaping this, you know, like that to me, that in a weird way, kind of gives me hope, because I feel like this is not a situation where we can go back to quote unquote normal. This is not a situation where we can't afford to be like, you know, I'll get to it later, or I'm not involved, or whatever the case may be. It's like, no, run it back. Run that
one
shit
more
back.
time, kids.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Until you get this right.
Yeah.
So,
well, but that's the case for any good performance, right? If you've ever been on stage, if you've ever been in a band or in a dance troupe or whatever, or acting, how many times you have to run a scene over and over again? Because, you know, not everyone knows their stuff yet, but you do it until everyone has their marks and it looks good. So, but we don't like to, you know, play together well. So that's our main problem. It's a me show.
Speaking of Saturn, I kind of wanted to talk about, you know, Saturn in Aquarius this year, because it gets to 25 degrees. And for a good chunk of the year, most of the year, it's squaring the nodes, it's squaring the nodal axis in Taurus and Scorpio. And so, yeah, I'm wondering if you guys have thoughts about this. I mean, the nodes just switched a couple of weeks ago into Taurus and Scorpio. It felt like immediately, like things started to, I just felt the show. I feel like a lot of people like really felt it. Yeah, but without going into that, just like the whole fixed sign vibe of this year with the nodes and the eclipses and then Saturn squaring it, like I'm curious what you guys have been thinking about it, because to me it feels like Saturn trying to, I mean, of course Uranus is involved here too, but it feels like Saturn trying to like hold things together. But at the bendings to me is sort of like the Bermuda Triangle or something, like something where like things just like get weird and time bends and everything gets distorted. And so Saturn kind of like Lord of Time, trying to like, you know, construct things and keep things in order. And then, but being in this like kind of like dizzy place at the bendings and also having to deal with these run-ins with Uranus just feels like kind of chaotic. I don't know. What are you guys thinking?
I like Judith Hill's explanation for planets being in the bending in her books. I was looking at her explanation for Saturn being in the bends, and she was talking about it being something along the lines of you're being faced with a permanent choice between two opposites. You know, and I know in that chart, I believe Saturn is conjoined with Mars in Aquarius. And Jupiter's hooked up with Neptune and Venus, all in Pisces, I believe. And so I do think we're going to be facing a decision, especially between those nodes in Taurus and Scorpio. It's evaluation, right? Which way we're going to go, probably not permanent, but for at least for the next 30 years, possibly, since it is Saturn, right? A choice that we're going to make, and whichever direction we're going to go, because, you know, South Node, North Node, which way do you want to go is going to, you know, have a lot of influence. The other thing too about those nodes is like, ultimately, I think it's really a choice between Jupiter and Saturn, because the North Node in Taurus is ruled by Venus and Pisces. Venus and Pisces ruled by Jupiter. And then the South Node in Scorpio ruled by Mars and Aquarius. Mars and Aquarius ruled by Saturn. So those two guys, Jupiter and Saturn, in their domicile, asking us which way do you want to go, right? I think the Jupiter expression with Venus, Taurus kind of stuff is a little bit more fruitful, a little bit more hopeful. But again, we do know that there's some downfalls with that, right? We can head into a lot of delusion about what's going on, and that could be a bit dangerous. But Saturn and Mars together makes me feel like we should go for Jupiter, honestly. Like, I saw that and I was like, oh no, not that girl.
Do you remember the last time? It was it was April 2020, right when lockdowns were like just like really kicking in. And Saturn had just entered Aquarius, and Saturn had like 4 days to be like, oh, nice. In my, you know, back in Aquarius, feeling good. And Mars comes in, like starts the fire, you know. So yeah, I'm not looking forward to that either. It's exactly square to my Scorpio stellium, that conjunction. So yeah, not excited.
And I think Uranus is in there by a loose square as well. So there's a lot of tension with that Saturn, Mars, Uranus situation. So it's going to be a choice that hopefully will be obvious, you know, which way to go. Like maybe we don't want to go down the martial, Saturnian, harsh, you know, fight violently for everything. Maybe we want to go a little bit softer with Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces. Maybe we want to do some compassion, some humanity, clean the fucking water. Maybe, I don't know, like something sweet and kind that would help everybody.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, exactly. No, and I think the difficult part here is that they can't see each other, and maybe that's nice, and maybe it's not. You know, like I just feel like there's no negotiating between Jupiter and Saturn right now. It's like they're both they're both trying to get their way. I think they both do get their way in different ways. But yeah, the Jupiter Saturn piece, especially when Venus comes through Pisces in April, makes me really, that's a part that I'm concerned about, like the cults and the religious zealot I can't say that word. Zealotry, yes. And yeah, people really taking their faith too far. Yeah, that's a time period that's really interesting, because it's like so nice for the Pisces stuff and so not for the Aquarius stuff.
I mean, ideally, it would be a great time if people would recognize all the ways in which different faiths, whether religious or otherwise, are interconnected, right? That's the beauty of Jupiter and Pisces, is like under the water, under the sea, everyone's connected, right? Like everyone's in the same water. So hopefully there'll be some artistic expression or faithful expression that will come forward to kind of soften things up too.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about Jupiter and Aries? Because we're going to have that for like at least 6 months, right? Jupiter and Aries. So Jupiter is going to leave Pisces on May 10th and enter Aries, and will be there until October 27th. And the interesting thing about Jupiter and Aries this year is it's going to enter in May, and then Venus will already be there. So it's going to be both benefics in Aries for a little bit. And then Mars enters towards the end of May. And they form a conjunction around 3 degrees of Aries. I think it's at the very end of May, like the 30th or 31st or something. So yeah, how are you guys thinking about Jupiter and Aries? I definitely wasn't like aware. I wasn't paying attention to astrology last time Jupiter was in Aries. So I'm sort of like, it feels like it's like oh, this is a new thing that like I get to experience. And yeah, how are you guys thinking about it? I think it's really interesting that Mars is going to be there with it, like right off the bat.
Well, I was thinking about it in terms of weather, because I was looking ahead at some of the solstice and equinox charts, and I think we're going to have that Jupiter Mars conjunction and the moon as well in Aries for the summer charts.
Oh, wow.
So I think it's going to be a pretty hot and dry summer.
Okay.
And there's some other things happening in that solstice chart. I'm just like, oh,
Yeah.
great. Depending on where you are, this chart does look pretty active for earthquakes, possibly. So I would say a possible heads up to California for the summer seasons for fires and possibly earthquakes.
Noted.
Yeah.
I'm going to be in Europe all summer, but
she's like, peace.
Whoever's going to be in my apartment, I'll let them know. No, but that's a good point. It's what's interesting is we got so much moisture this winter so far with Jupiter and Pisces. You know, we've been getting a lot of, but there's been a lot of snow in certain parts of the country. Out in California, we got a lot of rain in December. We got a lot of rain, and it's and into January, and it's showing like everything's green. I go on hikes, and you know, parts of my favorite hike that was burned down during a fire, like all the hills are green again. And it's exciting. It's exciting that, I mean, we were annoyed by it out here. Like, can it stop raining? But at the same time, it was like, I know this is it's going to be good in a couple of weeks. And it's already paying off. So that's cool to think about it that way. And, you know, it's always important to whenever I see a lot of fire sign energy in the summer, I'm always a little bit worried. So
yeah,
that's
I
good
don't
to
think
think
it will
about.
be as bad as last summer. That was like
The Mars retrograde.
That was the grand cross between all the fixed signs. It was a Mars, Uranus, Saturn T-square, and the moon in Scorpio to intensify. And it was all a grand cross and fixed. So that was like, I think, kind of the chart that we can use for extreme weather events, like in terms of helping us delineate like how bad it is on the scale.
Got it.
Pretty rough summer last summer. Every day was something terrible. Weather-wise.
Oh yeah, I remember I got out of New York right before the really bad flood, because it was flooding when I was there. And yeah, I know what you're talking about now. Yeah, what else about Jupiter and Aries is kind of coming to mind for you guys?
I don't know. I feel like I need to look at that transit a little bit more, but I think for me, there's concerns that I have. I mean, as a fire sign, I like when planets are in fire, because it's like, hey, it's fun. But Jupiter and Aries, I don't know. I mean, I think about, like, again, like religious, extremism, especially because when Jupiter starts out in Aries, Mars will be in Pisces at that time.
They have that mutual reception.
Right. So I think that's one thing that I'm concerned about. I think misinformation is another issue, because when Janelle and I were talking a little bit before this call, I was saying that or we noted that Jupiter would be in Aries well until when Mars like kind of switches over into Gemini, because we have that Mars retrograde at the end of the year in Gemini. And I think I have been having, like, there was a lot of talk about this over the last year about how, like, foreign entities have been having their hands in terms of, like, in our affairs by way of social media and things like that. I know there's been an article that was published recently, I think in the LA Times, I want to say, about how a lot of like tarot readers and astrologers have been getting like scammers, setting up,
that
like
was LA Times. I was in it.
oh yeah. I think Kirah's in there. Who've been, trying to scam people by creating like phony accounts. Most recently, there's been a rash of people losing their Instagram accounts because scammers have been tricking them into like getting like their password information and things like that. So I'm a bit concerned that might continue to be an even bigger issue, as we go into the year, especially because we have the midterm elections coming up. And I feel like that could be grounds for like some funny business.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it as like Jupiter is able to do Mars's bidding when it's in Aries, and with Mars in there kind of like giving orders too, and from this really resource place. It's like, what do you want, Mars and Aries? What are you going to be, directing Jupiter to do? So that can be concerning thinking about it that way. Otherwise, it's kind of nice that they'll be sextile Saturn instead of conjunct, and it's going to, Mars will eventually get into Taurus, and that won't be cute anymore. But yeah.
I mean, the other way that it could play out is maybe, around that time, people will find their fight again. I think everybody is really burnt out and worn out right now point. In terms of, having to fight fascism, a pandemic, wrapped in fascism.
Yeah.
And a lot of other different things going on, that's capitalism, all of those things kind of tied together. And I think people have just been really, really just burned out, and I think that, of course, with fascists, it's designed to be that way, to like just hammer people constantly, so that they lose hope. But my hope is that Jupiter move into Aries will help people be like, nah. Nah, son.
We could see like a wave of activism again, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we could also see the extremism too.
Right.
Because Aries as an energy tends to be a lot more impulsive when it comes to Mars, especially when we're going to have that Mars and Jupiter together. With the wait and see, because that's very quick starting energy, because it's cardinal. So I remember me and Mecca were talking about, we're going to be seeing these strikes and this, that, and the other, which we have been seeing, but it's been very slow, right? Because Uranus is in Taurus, and this kind of slowly, everyone bit by bit, is striking. But with Jupiter and Aries, with Mars, I think we're going to see a lot more action, a lot more, quick.
That's such a good point.
Things,
and Mars ruling the South Node from Aries too is like a lot more releasing happening quickly too. Venus will be in Taurus in June during most of that Mars transit, so that's something to also kind of look forward to with some ease. Although they won't see each other, it's still, I think, nice to be able to lean on benefics when they're in domicile, when other stuff's going on. And we, in the background, we talked about Saturn, Uranus squaring each other. We don't get another exact square, but we get a near exact square. I think it's in October when they're both around 18 degrees. They're both at 18. They just don't reach an exact square by, or exact aspect to the minute. It doesn't get to the minute. But regardless, that's a thing. We get this very gnarly Mars Uranus North Node conjunction. I think it's August 1st.
That was scary. I was like,
I'm like, do we have to talk about that?
Do we have to talk about that? I mean, again, maybe that will be more mass action. Maybe that will be when strikes really start to pick up or something like that.
Venus will be sextiling it from Cancer. Okay. So Venus is ruling it in Cancer, sextiling it. So that's a little bit of help, maybe a little bit of relief, but
but it's still Mars and it's still Uranus.
And the North Node.
So it's definitely gonna be something amplified. I always think about how the last time Uranus was in the sign of Taurus in the 1930s, we were definitely dealing with the Great Depression and food scarcity, because there were, dust bowls. So people had to look for food. Now, hopefully it doesn't get that bad, but we're definitely dealing with issues around food and getting things to people and supplies and resources. So that definitely comes to mind. Could there be a cutting off of resources? Could there be something that disrupts it? Something that disrupts the action process of getting food and things to people, maybe possibly, or something that disrupts the land itself. The fixed signs show up quite a bit with earthquakes, and because the nodes are now in Scorpio and Taurus, those are the two main signs that show up the most when it comes to seismic activities. And we've already seen that. Where was it? Tonga, that they had this massive volcanic eruption, and we still are not hearing that much about what's going to happen next and whether any of those people on those islands are going to, survive. And it sounds terrible, but that's what happens on planet Earth, right? We have eruptions and new land masses are born and old ones are taken to the bottom of the sea. That's just the process. But it's something that we don't seem to acknowledge in our modern life. Like, no, we have technology. We don't know, but it's just like, it's the earth. Like, she does what she wants. Like,
exactly. Especially when we've been like fucking with her ozone layer for so long.
Yeah. And that's definitely something to think about. I was thinking about COVID this way. It's just like the way that we treat the earth in terms of poisoning and just the way that we behave has come back around as a virus that impacts the entire human body from top to bottom. Just how we are contaminating our environment, it's come back around to show us what it feels like. What's the long-term impact of being infected? It doesn't go away. It sits in the body, and how do you begin to function? So I definitely think it's a very reflective thing to think about.
Yes. Yeah. The summer is weird. We get a lot of weird combinations of like lots of fire and all the Aries planets. We have all the Aries transits, and then we kind of get back into that fixed energy, especially in Leo season. Planets moving through Leo. We get Mars in Taurus with Uranus, North Node, Saturn squaring everything, Uranus stationing, Saturn stationing, like so fixed. And that kind of takes us into, the end of August when Mars will enter Gemini and be there for 7 months. Mars is going to be in Gemini. When is this? Yeah.
We don't catch a break.
We're literally
catching a break.
Mars will enter Gemini late August. I think it's around August 20th, and we'll be there until late March. And at that point, Saturn will even be out of Aquarius by then. And so yeah. And Mars will station retrograde October 30th and will be retrograde until January 12th. So we get this very extended Mars and Gemini transit. I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, not, Mars retrogrades aren't fun or anything, but I am a little hopeful of the fact that it's, away from the Saturn Uranus stuff. For a minute, right? For 7 months, we don't have Mars interacting with Saturn and Uranus, except Mars will trine Saturn. But at least no hard aspects. So I'm happy about the trine. Well, not happy, but I prefer the trine for sure than 2020's square, domiciled, Mars Saturn square. And really the most difficult part, I think, of this Mars retrograde is that it's stationing square Neptune. And that's really who Mars is like interacting with most of the time in this retrograde period, or the whole period that it's in Gemini. I do love that in October we get Venus in Libra. Like we'll get Venus in Libra trine Saturn, and then also Saturn and Mars trine. We get that basically grand Earth trine. Yeah, thoughts about Mars retrograde in Gemini. I'll just say it stations retrograde at 25 degrees of Gemini, and it's going to station direct in January at 8
that's
degrees.
right on top of Neptune. God damn it.
Yeah, right on top of Neptune.
Fuck.
Think about me. I'm like, that's all over my stuff. That's like
I'm like, get away from my God. Exactly.
Yeah. I feel it too. With my son. I mean, I get the Saturn Uranus square on my moon and ascendant. It just left my Mars not too long ago, so I'm getting a little bit of a break. But in terms of the transit itself, I don't know. The first thing that comes to my mind around that Mars retrograde square to Neptune is possibly more variants of COVID.
Yeah, that's right around the time, things get colder, we're more indoors too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's the thing that I'm a bit concerned about, because way back in 2020, at the start of the pandemic, when Janelle and I were first talking about the spread, we saw that COVID had a Pisces signature on it. So when Neptune, I'm always like flinching whenever a planet hits Neptune, by a square or
Mm-hmm.
an opposition, because I'm like, ah, fuck, like what is that looking like in terms of like transmission and infections and things like that. And then we
Well,
all, no, go ahead, sorry.
no, I was just gonna say, this reminds me that Venus stationed here in 2020. Venus stationed at like 20, I think it was like 21 Gemini, square Neptune in 2020, right around the beginning of COVID. So it's interesting that Mars is coming back to right around the same degree and squaring Neptune again. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was also thinking, Gemini as a sign can sometimes have association with schools and sometimes young people as well. And as these new, I think there's like another Omicron variant that's like a subvariant that they're finding is having a lot of impact on young children and infants. And so just thinking how that might be, depending what we're doing, if we're going to have the schools might be the new epicenter of these new variants. And of course, there might be multiples. There might be several that come out at once because, we're everything's back to normal, that kind of thing. And then, we're birthing twin variants at one time
Gemini.
and it's spreading. Possibly.
That is a good point. Yeah.
And Gemini as well has association with the lungs, right? And the hands, and so we could be seeing more issues around not only respiratory stuff but also dexterity and maybe
right. And remember, the whole thing with COVID too has been about how it's not just respiratory, it's been a neurological issue, right, for a lot of people, right? Vascular and neurological. So I think that is also going to be something we're going to have to keep an eye on, as we go back into the fall.
Definitely.
Yeah, which would make sense for the school season, right? Back to school
and just grand earth trine, like it's just, and maybe that also things maybe that also might mean things might be more diluted at that point too, in terms of like the viral load, because that's kind of what's happening. Maybe not so much, but that's kind of what people are talking about. Like as time goes on, we'll definitely keep having it, but it'll be less and less deadly. So that's kind of what makes me think about like all the air. It's like, but we also have Neptune there. So
I mean, listen, this is one we have to go back and look at history, right? So, I remember I watched this really great thing on YouTube, like the history of pandemics, and just like, some pandemics lasted like 100 years, right? Because they just had these waves and waves. Now, I'm not saying we're going to have that here, but it has happened in the past. And again, I don't want us to think that because we're here at this point in time and our technology, yada, 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 that we got this. And it's just like, I don't know about that, so hopefully there's not this idea, Mars and Gemini might think it's a lot smarter than it is too, right? It's that hubris of the thought like, oh, we're 3 years into this. We know what we're doing, girls. Like, do we though?
Right.
Especially with Neptune there, which might kind of throw, some unexpected, mix into it, where deception, right? Oh, we thought it was one thing and now, oops, it's not that thing. Or we thought we were acting towards this goal and then found out we were doing the exact opposite of that. So having to be very mindful about how we behave during that time too, because it probably have some twice the boomerang effect. Might get slapped twice.
Hate it here. And then Jupiter comes back right around the same time into Pisces, October 27th. So Jupiter re-enters Pisces 3 days later. Mars will station retrograde, pretty much square Jupiter as well. It's wide, but
so far with each ingress of Jupiter into Pisces, there's been a really foolish decision with it. Right. So the first time in May of 2021, CDC, if you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask. We're like, don't do that. Like, that's delusion.
Especially as astrologers who knew it was going to go back into Aquarius.
And then I think this recent one, when it came back in December, what was the decision they made around COVID that we were just like, no, don't do that?
Yeah, they changed the quarantine rules, right? They're like, just 3 days now or whatever, like 4 or 5 days. You're good.
So we might have to watch that again when he comes back in.
Right, especially because Mars infections might have a lot to say about that foolhardy kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So people got really mad when I said delusion. They were like, no, they were so judgmental about Pisces. Like, I'm a Pisces moon. Trust me, I know what delusion is. Like, I'm not trying to be mean,
take it from us.
Take it from us. But sometimes there's just this belief and hopefulness is very Pollyanna. No, it's fine. It's gonna be great. And then when the evidence come back that it's not, not being able to walk it back or admit to it, which is
it's hard.
problem.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's a real mutable sign problem in general, right? Like when we talk about Gemini, Pisces, Sag, Virgo a little bit to some degree.
A little bit more grounded.
Right. Virgo's a little bit more grounded, but definitely like what they say, cash and checks that your
your ass can't cash.
Yeah, can't cash. Writing checks that your ass can't cash.
Stop! I'm feeling called out right now. Beautiful ass.
It's hard out here in these streets. We're still recovering, man. Like, give us a minute.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I want to say, like, if you're exhausted, like, that is totally valid. Like, we're all like that. We've been living in a hellscape, like it makes sense if you're just like, I need this to be over. Like you are not alone in that. It's just this shitty reality, part of the reality that we're in that's really shitty. But yeah, just to say, like, we're all so sick of it. And we're all hoping that we all want it to go away. We all want this to be the last variant and the last whatever. But yeah, you're right. It's the Saturnian realities kind of slapping us in the face continuously, being like, not yet, bitch.
Yeah, but again, our free will is also like, are your actions lining up with what you say that you want? Because that's what Mars and Saturn are trying to do. Like, we're malefic because, if you work with us and you don't do right, you get this really interesting result, whatever it might be. Right. So, for us, it's like, well, are you acting to get the end result, or are you just acting as if the end result is already certain? That's the problem. It's over, but where do you see it's over? I don't see that.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then we didn't really mention, but we do get more eclipses, Taurus, Scorpio eclipses. We did kind of talk about it a little bit. And yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to like kind of circle back to what we were talking about before around mundane versus natal, because we've talked about a lot of stuff that might be getting people down, which is like, it's fair. Again, the time that we live in, there's not a lot of like, there's a lot of exposure around what is really difficult, especially because we're living in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. That's just like a difficult thing in and of itself. And on top of that, climate change, on top of that, economic inequality, on top of that, we're getting our rights taken away left and right from under our fucking noses. So it's very natural to get anxious about this stuff. What is important to remember is, again, we're talking about global transit. We're talking about stuff that's happening on a collective scale. It does not mean that if something terrible happens on a global scale, that it's going to ruin your life specifically, or even affect you on a day-to-day basis. It probably can and probably will in some degree, but how that even affects you, that can vary in so many different ways too. So try to remember to, do the Saturn and create some distance between, mundane transits and what's going on this global scale and what's going on in your day-to-day life, because you kind of have to look at it as the micro and macro and not all in one all the time. Yeah. Do you guys have any like kind of final closing thoughts on 2020 and maybe like some advice or some parts of 2020 that you're like feel good about or excited about?
We're going back to 2020. Wait.
Oh, sorry, I meant 2022.
I was just like, wait,
no.
No.
Rewind, cancel, never going back there.
Oh gosh, I don't know, Mecca, do you have anything?
I think the thing I guess that I've been talking to people about is like we still have, we still have some rough sky to get through, because there's still a lot of work to be done. But that doesn't mean that there won't be, some breaks in the cloud, this year. And I think that, it's important to look for the hope where we can, and to try to, like, try to have fun where we can. I think that we would do ourselves a grave disservice by kind of being in this space of, like, all is lost, let me just pack it up and give it up. I think that that's what the fascists want us to do, essentially. But I think that, when we kind of, and it kind of makes me think about Scorpio, like Scorpio Taurus axis is like, when you go through something like really tough or challenging, it really shows you what makes life worth living for. And my hope is that even with all the darkness and the, despair that's going on right now, that people are really getting a sense of, like, what really makes life worth living for. And then that's where we can find the beauty and the hope and the peace and the laughter, and all those good things.
Mm-hmm. That was beautifully said. Yeah. We have to remember to prioritize joy, prioritize pleasure, community, fun. That's important to never give up. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'd probably say more of the same, with all this Piscean, Jupiter, Neptune stuff. There's a lot of possibility for great art and magic, right? That romance in life. Kirah was teasing me for my Pisces moon earlier because I was like, I love this now. Like, I think it's just so pretty. Oh my God. But it's important. I think that's important to have that dream and that hope, because that's what, when we dream, that's what gives us vision for the future. It's the hopefulness that we can create something. And then with that dream, if you can find like-minded people to help build it, like, that's the first step. But it's important to have faith and belief in the goodness of humanity too. Right. And it's important to know that, darkness also helps us to see the light. We can't have one without the other. And I think hopefully we're going to become a little bit more holistic. We're examining we're examining ourselves, and it's not always pleasant. That's that very platonic, scorpionic thing. Like, oh, you want to be this great flower? Great. Well, manure, right? Darkness, being underground. You have to put some roots down. You have to actually strive for these things. And if you're unwilling to work for it and put some effort into it, like, is it going to be something that you cherish when you actually have it? Right. And I think that's the thing with also Taurus and Scorpio. Like, the blood, sweat, and tears of Scorpio do manifest as something beautiful in Taurus, but you have to be willing to go through that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a great point. And a great note to end on, I think. Yeah. Let's let the people know where they can find you. Mecca, do you want to share?
Sure. If you want to find me, you can find my website. It's mylifecreated.com. Also, listen to me and Janelle's podcast, Stars on Fire, which is pretty much available wherever podcasts are happening these days. I can't keep up. I'm sorry, I'm old. But
at least you know what SMR is. I was just like, what is that? I'm an old biddy.
In your books, you have like a million books.
Yes. So I have Astrology for Happiness and Success, which is currently out, as well as the Astrology Journal. And I also have astrology coloring books as well. And you can find each of those books too, like wherever books are sold.
Awesome. And Janelle?
You can find me on Twitter at jsoabove. You can find my website at soabove.com. And yeah, I'm seeing clients and chit-chatting with people and helping to guide people through all these storms. And I'm happy to be here to help. and listen to our podcast. Of course, we'll be back pretty soon. We're just recovering. We are limping back into the our stables after a very long journey with the South Node and those eclipses. We really were getting just whooped. So that's why we've been like, we're not. Yeah, we're trying.
We need new horseshoes. We need to be brushed.
We need water. We need oats. We need the whole shebang.
Oh my
so
gosh.
we're getting back there. We didn't want to abandon anyone, but we were just not there energetically to do that kind of show, you know.
That is so valid. I mean, same. I haven't, this is me starting to record again after like, I don't know, very many months. I don't remember when we stopped. It was like April of last year. So I hear you. And yeah, thank you so much for being here again. So
Thank
great.
you for having us. Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure.